Good morning. I'm Pauline Berzosa sitting in for Gretchen Ho. It is Monday, the 8th of September, and we're bringing you Morning Matters because your mornings matter. Now let's get to the stories that matter today. The Senate Blue Ribbon Committee is set to resume its probe into controversial flood control projects today. However, Baguio City Mayor and good governance advocate Benjamin Magalong has already announced his absence from the hearing. President Bongbong Marcos vowed a thorough probe into alleged infrastructure anomalies, expressing dismay over the hardships Filipinos are facing. Speaking on the fourth episode of his PBBM podcast, he declared there will be no sacred cows, stressing that friends and allies will not be spared in the inquiry. And the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, or CBCP, is demanding the return of money from anomalous flood control projects. This call was made in a pastoral letter by CBCP President and Caloocan Bishop Cardinal Pablo Virgilio David, who condemned the anatomy of corruption in government projects. Welcome to our program, Morning Matters, where we talk about the issues you need to know for the rest of your day. Now, first on the agenda, the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee will resume its investigation today, September 8, into the controversial flood control projects. Senate President Cheese Escudero has approved subpoenas for 5 contractors and 3 public works officials to testify in the hearing. The Commission on Audit was also ordered to submit its fraud audit highlights on the projects, along with the responses of those involved. Escudero stressed that no stone will be left unturned in holding accountable those behind the questionable projects, which he said have caused both financial losses and hardships for Filipinos. Baguio City Mayor Benjamin Magalong has turned down the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee's invitation to testify in its investigation of questionable flood control projects. Here's the report.
After contractors subpoenaed by the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee faced the panel, Mayor Benjamin Magalong was next invited to testify on the questionable flood control projects. But even before the hearing began, Magalong refused to attend. Magalong insisted he had long committed to attend the House Tricam hearing on the controversial projects, calling it his response to Congressman's challenge. He is also waiting for the President's decision on the creation of an independent body to investigate the flood control projects. Magalong also joined progressive groups in Baguio protesting against the controversial projects. He condemned what he called the greed of corrupt politicians, saying they are masterminds behind anomalous projects.
May sala ang contractor, may sala yung mga involved dyan sa mga infrastruktura ng proyekto. Hindi pa yan. Ang pinaka-sakim dyan, pinaka-mastermind dyan, yung mga politiko. Kaya hindi ho dapat tayo huminto. Dahil ito'y laban ho natin para sa kabataan, laban din ho natin to para sa ating bayan.
He urged young people to stay engaged, stressing that the fight against corruption must continue not just for Baguio but for the entire country. Magalong also called on Filipinos to choose leaders wisely, warning against the lure of money and power that undermines moral values. He added that social activism is vital in pushing for good governance.
Kaya dito sa Baguio, pinapayagan ko po ang social activism. Because this is the only way we will be able to change the world. Sabi ko nga it does not take one to have a title, to have a position, to have influence, to have fame, to have money. All you have to do is have that courage to change the world. And you are practically doing it now. And thanks to our young people.
Various groups are now preparing for more mass protests in the city as the investigation continues, with demands that someone be held criminally liable for the controversial flood control projects.
Meanwhile, President Bongbong Marcos expressed dismay over the hardships faced by Filipinos as he vowed to pursue a thorough investigation into alleged anomalies in infrastructure projects. In the fourth episode of the BBM podcast, Marcos said there will be no sacred cows in the inquiry, stressing that not even friends nor allies will be spared. The president also emphasized that he was more than just disappointed, expressing deep anger over the corruption and abuses committed against the people. Still, Marcos said he remains hopeful, assuring the public that the government is working to ease burdens and address challenges.
I'm not disheartened, I'm not disappointed. I get very, very angry. How can you do this to people that have worked every day of their lives? Walang ginawa ito kundi magtrabaho. Nagsakripisyo ng mahirap for very little. Just to be able to send money home, just to be able to feed their family, send their children to school. That's all they want in life. Kukunin nyo pa sa kanila yon para bumili ng Rolls Royce. Nobody is more important than Filipinos. Nobody, not one person is more important. Not me, not anybody is more important.
In other news, Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin criticized the House of Representatives' proposal to return the 2026 national budget to the Department of Budget and Management. He described the move as unprecedented and outside the framework of the Constitution. Bersamin added that the proposal puts the executive in a bad light and urged lawmakers to clean their own house first before questioning other branches of government. He also noted that Malacanang will soon launch an independent commission to investigate alleged anomalies in flood control projects. Don't go away, we will be back with more stories right after this break. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters here on One News. The Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, or CBCP, urged the return of stolen funds from anomalous flood control projects, saying restitution is essential for justice. In a pastoral letter, CBCP President and Caloocan Bishop Cardinal Pablo Virgilio David denounced the anatomy of corruption in public works. He stressed that accountability should extend not only to contractors, but also to lawmakers, district engineers, auditors, and political patrons involved in the system. David also urged Filipinos, especially the youth, to take an active role in fighting corruption by exposing wrongdoing, rejecting patronage politics, supporting independent probes, and demanding accountability from leaders. And now to discuss this further, we are joined by CBCP Episcopal Commission and Public Affairs Executive Secretary, Father Jerome Ceciliano. Good morning, Father Jerome, and welcome back to Morning Matters.
Yes, good morning po again.
All right, first of all, Father, what led the Church to take a stand on the flood control controversy? And can you walk us through why the CBCP felt the need to issue a statement regarding this?
Well, it's a very serious issue. Corruption is already endemic in our society. A lot of people are affected. And so therefore, as a church institution, I think we are deeply responsible also to take a stand against it.
Well, personally, Father, what struck me in this letter is that the bishops even admitted that the church itself has at times failed by remaining silent, but it is speaking up now. I mean, we do know there is the separation of church and state, but now we hear the church taking a stand on these controversies. How serious are the concerns of the church into these alleged misuse of public funds?
Well, we can even invoke the doctrine of separation of church and state in this issue, because corruption is an issue that affects us all. And so therefore, as a church, we are deeply responsible also in, number one, making those involved in corruption accountable, and also to denounce corruption, because corruption is evil. That's why when you ask me about how concerned are we, we're deeply concerned really, because it is not only us as a church that's affected. Even ordinary Filipinos are affected by it. When we see flooding everywhere, it's the ordinary and poor Filipinos who are very much affected by it. And it's also a form of injustice. And injustice should not have a place in our society. So the church is making a stand now. The church is using her voice in order to make these people who are involved in corruption practices indeed be wary that we are looking at them, we are observing them, and that we are angry about what they are doing right now.
And Father, the pastoral letter did shame and did say that shame and accountability should not stop with contractors, but it should also extend to legislators, engineers, auditors, and even political patrons. I mean, how do you see their role in perpetuating this racket and this anatomy of corruption, so to speak? And do you think that we're being led astray to the real culprits of this injustice, so to speak, Father?
No, we are not being led astray because even investigations show that these are the people who are very much involved in these corrupt practices. Contractors cannot do it alone. There will always be the political component of it. Meaning to say the politicians are there. They're the ones financing the projects. And so it's a web actually of, of corruption. So we see contractors, we see agencies, we see politicians, and we should make them also accountable and not only single out all these contractors that are being named, in the investigations.
But Father, what do you think about the hearings, the congressional hearings? Are you satisfied with how they are being conducted? Because the bishops also raised doubts on the credibility of this investigation being conducted by Congress. I mean, in your view, can they truly be impartial if their colleagues, fellow lawmakers, are possibly implicated in this?
Impartiality will always be a question. Because in the first place, when you investigate contractors without investigating the politicians who are allegedly involved in it, of course, it's not going to be impartial. So we see already that there are sacred cows in the investigation. But then for the lawmakers to really prove to the public that they are serious in weeding out corruption, that they are also serious in making those involved in corruption accountable, so they should investigate everyone.
And Father, the letter also did say that the CBCP supports the creation of an independent committee to probe these anomalies. In your opinion, who should be leading this investigation and who should compose this committee, this commission, in order to ensure credibility?
Well, when we speak of impartiality and then emphasizing also the credibility of particular commission, I think it should not only be composed of politicians. It should also be composed of some civil society groups and maybe some experts. So these are the type of people who should be included if we really wish to have an impartial investigation of the matter.
And Father, the CBCP also emphasized that it's not just punishment, but restitution is also needed, that these stolen funds must be returned to the people. Realistically, Father, is that even possible? How realistic is that call?
Well, it is a doctrine in the church that for you to be forgiven, especially from the sin of stealing, you have to really return the things or the money that you stole. So it is just an emphasis that the church would like to do, because that is the reality that we live in. So, but then again, if you're asking me about if it is realistic, I don't know. But then again, it must be done. It must be done because if this money are spent not for the projects and not to benefit the poor or the simple people among us, then it's still a form of injustice that continues to be committed. So therefore, if there will be investigations, the investigations that will point to the culprits should also tell these culprits to return the money. Just like, for example, what they did to some senators. When they were investigated for plunder, during the time of Napoles, then they were also ordered to return the money that they pocketed. So that's a form of retribution or a return of what they stole from the public.
And Father, speaking of retribution, what do you think is the most fitting punishment for this kind of injustice? Stealing funds, that brazen act of crime of misusing these funds for projects that are ghost or even substandard?
No, I don't have something in mind. Maybe imprisonment. So whatever the laws say, then perhaps they could just simply follow the law. So if there is a provision for them to be imprisoned for life, then they should just apply the law. That's it.
And Father, from the church's perspective, what do you think are the lessons that leaders and citizens, ordinary citizens, should learn from this controversy, from this discussion? I mean, given the history of failed anti-corruption initiatives in the past, how can the public also be assured that this call won't just be another, what we call just a paper reform?
Well, number one, there should be sustained pressure coming from the public. When this issue came up, the public really rose up in anger. And they were really condemning this evil practice. So without the condemnation of the public, without the pressure from the public, these culprits would just think that what they're doing is right. But now that the public is well aware of what happened, and now that they are angry, and you see, parang sa Tagalog yun, nagkakanda kumahog sila ngayon sa kanilang mga investigations. So I think that's number one. And of course, number two is the public should be vigilant and not be quiet. When the CBCP said that sometimes we also feel guilty because we have been quiet in the past. So I think when we see malpractices in the government, corrupt practices in the government, then we have to speak up. We don't need to just keep a blind eye. We have to really raise our voice, our concerns. Because without those concerns, without the voices that come from us denouncing malpractices or evil practices, then these things will just continue to be done by those evil in the government.
That's right, because in the pastoral letter also, Father, the CBCP did encourage Filipinos, especially the youth, to use digital platforms for vigilance and truth-telling. How important are digital platforms now, Father, in sustaining this pressure for our local officials, government officials?
Well, I think if we can post just anything in social media, and why can't we also post messages of denunciation about these corrupt practices? So it's just as simple as being involved, being knowledgeable about what's happening, and then express our disgust and anger. So the social media is just merely a platform given to us that we should now use to our advantage. So it's all about knowing the facts and then denouncing these corrupt practices and then expressing our disgust and anger. And I think when we do that, that's a form of making these people be aware, and that's also a way of making them accountable for what they did.
And lastly, Father, what message does the church have for lawmakers who are investigating these flood control anomalies? And also, what is your message to those in power who may be directly implicated in this controversy?
Well, I think the CBCP pastoral letter says it all. That we should live simply, that we should not live in excess, that we should not be greedy, and that for those in the positions of power, that they should really exercise a form of service. And then, of course, for those of us in the public, that we should continue to exercise our God-given right to put an end to evil practices, not only in the government, but even the church. It was said in the pastoral letter that even in the church, there may be corruption, and there may be some sort of abuses. And so we ourselves are reminded that we should live simply and always in accord with, the will of the Lord.
All right, well, we thank you for speaking to us this morning. That was CBCP Episcopal Commission on Public Affairs Executive Secretary, Father Jerome Siciliano. Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Now, in other news, the House Infrastructure Committee has subpoenaed 5 contractors linked to alleged anomalous flood control projects after failing to attend Tuesday's hearing. Among them is Sara Discaya of Alpha and Omega General Contractor, whose firms were earlier grilled in the Senate. Committee Chair Terry Redon says the focus will be on Diskaya-linked projects and their bidding practices.
I think the focus will be on the Diskaya-linked firms, no? The projects that they've undertook, yung pong mga corporate structure po nila, yung ways kung paano sila sumali sa mga bidding. Taantay namin siya sa 9:00 ng Martes.
Redon adds that Congress must decide jointly with the Senate on whether to suspend its probe once President Marcos's independent commission is formed. Despite the controversies, Redon insists flood control projects remain crucial but should be science-based and targeted only in high-risk areas.
Yung po mga sinasabi na hindi na dapat pondohan po yung flood control for next year, yan po ay wag nating pakinggan dahil nagpapa-hero-hero lang po yung mga yun. Yung pong Kongreso, ang gagawin na po niya, kailangan pong nakabatay sa NOAA project list, no? Pagka flood risk area ito, alam ba, pulang-pula ho yung lugar mo, doon ka lang pwedeng magkaroon ng flood control project.
Stay tuned. Morning Matters will be right back after this short break. Good morning and welcome back to Morning Matters. I'm Pauline Verzosa, and here on the show we talk about the most pressing issues and give you the context behind the headlines. The House Infrastructure Committee is set to invite members of the 2024 Bicameral Conference Committee in its probe on the alleged anomalous flood control projects. Among those eyed are former House Appropriations Chair Elizalde Co and former Senate Finance Chair and now Education Secretary Sonny Angara. This follows the discovery of a 96 million peso ghost flood control project in Barangay Sipat, Plaridel, Bulacan, recently inspected by DPWH Secretary Vince Dizon. Committee Chair Terry Redon says the project was inserted only during the BICAM since it was not part of the National Expenditure Program nor the House-approved budget.
We would have to ask the members of the Bicameral Conference Committee of 2024, alam po ba ninyo kung sino po yung nag-propose nito pong line item po na ito for flood control sa Plaridel, Bulacan? Ang implication po nito ay it was inserted by a member of the Senate or by a member of Congress during the Bicameral Conference Committee.
Questions continue to swirl around the controversy on divestment rules for government officials. And to help us unpack the implications, we are now joined by political analyst and lawyer, Attorney Michael Yusinko. Good morning, Attorney Michael, and welcome to Morning Matters.
Good morning to you, Pauline, and good morning to all the viewers and listeners of the program.
Okay, Attorney, before we get into the intricacies of these divestment rules, I wanted to ask, how satisfied are you with how Congress has been conducting these hearings? In a previous interview, you did call them as performative. What makes you say that?
Well, the reason why I think it's a performative exercise is because I fail to see the in aid of legislation part. So there's no question that Congress or lawmakers have the power to conduct inquiries in aid of legislation. So, for example, in just the news bit that preceded our interview, Congressman Redon said that they have information that there was an insertion made during the BICAM. So that fact is good to know, no? Obviously. Mm-hmm. But what follows next? This is my concern. What follows next? Now, if we adhere to what the Constitution says, which is the inquiry must be in aid of legislation, then what follows next from this committee should be recommendation as to how the budget process should be reformed. right? To prevent those kinds of insertions from ever happening again. So that could be overhauling the BICAM mechanism. Maybe it has become too powerful, right? Maybe it has become too insulated from scrutiny. So my problem with the investigations is that they just stay, or they remain stuck at fact finding. The next stage, which is really instituting reforms, is what is lacking.
But going back to these hearings, Attorney Michael, as I mentioned, there are so many questions swirling around what the divestment rules actually state for public officials. There are at least 5 laws, including the one in the 1987 Constitution, which prohibits public officials from having financial interests in government contracts. But can you clarify to us what the law actually says about the divestment requirement for public officials?
So, Pauline, if we do that, we will. That will probably take one whole day, because, as you said, it's very complex. But let's bring it down to the most basic, the most basic principle, and that is conflict of interest. So what the Constitution and these laws are trying to prevent from happening is the occurrence of a conflict of interest. So, for example, if I am a lawmaker, right? I'm not being a lawmaker doesn't deprive me of owning shares, right? So if I'm a lawmaker, if I have shares, let's say in a blue chip company, that's perfectly fine, right? But conflict of interest arises if I own majority shares in a construction company that deals with government. So that is what the law and the Constitution prohibits. No? It's not owning shares in general, but owning shares or having interest in a business enterprise or a corporation that deals with government. So the rules are complex. That's a fact. But the basic principle is very clear. If a public official has conflict of interest, or a public official has conflict of interest when that public official owns a business or is part of a business or has shares in the business that deals with government directly or indirectly.
But how can we categorize specifically, Attorney Michael, this conflict of interest? Is that, kumaga, kailangan nasa papel, there's a paper trail? Because take, for example, Congressman Zaldico, who was a part owner of SunWest, one of the controversial contractors who bagged billions in DPWH projects. But according to Congressman Terry Ridon, he has already divested from that business, so he can't be found in any documents.
Obviously, it has to be based on documents, no? Documentary evidence. But again, let's clarify, no? Interest can be direct or indirect. In other words, let's say in your example, the lawmaker has divested his shares, right? But if his wife or his kid or his brother still has shares, then that can still qualify as conflict of interest because of his indirect interest. So what we're talking about here, of course, is we need documentary evidence to support any assertion of conflict of interest or allegation of conflict of interest. But in defining what conflict of interest would entail, it doesn't mean direct ownership of an enterprise. It can be indirect ownership. So if the best example would always be the spouse. If the spouse of the lawmaker still has shares in a business, then that can still be considered as conflict of interest through indirect link or connection to the business concerned.
But apart from having the businesses under the names of their spouses, their relatives, attorney, are there other ways in how these public officials typically skirt this law prohibiting them from having interests in or financial interests in government contracts?
Yes, no. So the best, the most popular way to do it is to use a dummy corporation, no, getting lackeys as stockholders or directors, but really the mastermind behind the firm is still the lawmaker, no. So we also have examples of that. That can still be deemed as conflict of interest, but there is an initial step to be made, which is to pierce the veil of the dummy, right? To prove that the corporation or the business involved is indeed a dummy fronting for the lawmaker. So aside from using relatives, these lawmakers, public officials, also use dummies to shield themselves against this conflict of interest prohibition.
But legally speaking, attorney, I mean, does divestment shield government officials from these issues on conflict of interest? Kumbaga, what does the law say actually if nasa pangalan nga ng spouse or meron nga itong tinatawag na dummy person, will they be held accountable, responsible still for that?
Yes. No. So, like I said earlier, divestment is not automatically, parang an antidote to a conflict of interest prohibition. No, the law is that powerful. No, na conflict of interest can still be a case even if the connection is indirect. The connection of the public official involved is indirect. But that's very clear in the law, and it's also very clear in the Constitution. So the claim of divesting your shares can be proof of wala na akong interest dyan, but the ombudsman and the prosecutors can still provide other evidence to support the indirect link, and therefore can still prove that there was conflict of interest, and therefore there is corruption involved in the transaction.
But Attorney Michael, do you think that right now our current disclosure requirements like SAL-ins, are they enough to actually catch hidden business interests of public officials? And is this current framework on divestment and conflict of interest enough? Or what reforms does it need?
First of all, my answer to your question is not enough. Obviously, no, there are still other mechanisms that can be employed, but our issue now is that they are not being enforced enough. So let's start with the enforcement first before we even think of other mechanisms. No, so siguro ngayon ang dapat concern natin is dapat ipatupad ng mas masigasig. At least yung SALN, no? Kasi right now, ang batas natin at saligang batas natin, Pauline, they're very clear that the SALNs must be made accessible to the public, no? Subject to only to administrative requirements. But it has to be made accessible to the public. Pero hindi nangyayari, no? Because we had an ombudsman who said na no, this is not the case. Dapat pahirapan natin yung publiko bago ma-access yung SALN, which is wrong, no? So siguro ang concern muna natin ngayon is before thinking of other additional mechanisms, ano muna natin, let's insist first that the SALN be strictly enforced, no? The SALN rule be strictly enforced, and that is making it accessible to the public at all times.
And you're right, Attorney, because there are countries also like the United States and Indonesia who enforce really strict divestment and disqualification rules. So it is possible, right? But what role should the Ombudsman, the Commission on Audit, and even the SEC play in enforcing this and uncovering these conflicts of interest?
They have very important roles, no? So siguro let's start with the ombudsman. Kasi ang misconception natin, ang ombudsman is like a court, no? Well, in a way it is, but we have to look at the ombudsman as how it is described by its charter and the constitution as defender of the people, champion of the people. So, yung ombudsman, meron siyang malaking responsibility to be proactive when it comes to preventing corruption. So, pag meron lang siguro whiff of corruption, dapat nagtatrabaho na kagad yung ombudsman. Looking at documents, looking at SEC filings, right? So may role ang ombudsman to be the lead agency in all of these anti-corruption initiatives. Of course, the SEC has to support that role of the ombudsman, no, by providing documentary evidence when the ombudsman requires it. Now, ang COA kasi, they have a very specific function, no, under the Constitution. That's auditing. Now, that has to be also complementary to the role of the ombudsman. No? Because the ombudsman, of course, needs evidence to prove a case, no? Kasi ang ombudsman is a prosecutor of corruption cases. So lahat itong mga agencies na mini-mention natin, they have integral roles to play in the anti-corruption approach of the country. But the lead agency, the lead officer here is the ombudsman.
Is the ombudsman. But Attorney Michael, I don't know if you caught President Marcos's latest podcast. He did say that there will be no sacred cows, friends, not even allies will be spared in this investigation. But I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the real end game here? Will this process ever lead to actual jail time, punishment for politicians, or are we only looking at contractors taking the fall?
Well, that depends on who yung ombudsman is or would be, no? Kasi right now we don't have an ombudsman, where they're still interviewing candidates. Now it's like this, no? This is the reality. If President Marcos appoints an ombudsman who has no connection to him whatsoever, no personal, no professional connection to him, that means, or at least that tells me, that the ombudsman can function really independently and can pursue cases against political dynasties or dynastic politicians, even lawmakers who are allies of the president or maybe relatives of the president, no? So the key element here is that the ombudsman should have no connection whatsoever to the president, because that is the only way to be assured that the ombudsman can do its job impartially, independently, no, without any influence at all coming from Malacanang.
All right, well, we will be watching and monitoring this closely, but we'll leave that there for now. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us this morning. That was policy analyst and lawyer, Attorney Michael Yusinko. Thanks, Attorney.
Maraming salamat din.
Don't go away. We still have more matters to discuss after the break. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters here on One News. The House Appropriations Committee is set to hold a hearing on the proposed 2026 budget for the Office of the President. And for the details, we have mobile journalist Arles De Los Santos reporting to us this morning. Hi Arles, sino-sino yung mga key officials na inaasahan nating a-attend ng hearing today? Arles? All right, let's now head on over to the Senate for updates. We have mobile journalist Marimon Reyes also reporting live on the ground. Good morning, Marimon. Anong latest dyan?
Pauline, good morning. The Senate Blue Ribbon Committee is set to continue its probe on the anomalous flood control projects in the country. At inaasahan din na sa pamamagitan naman ng mga subpoena na inisyu ng Senado ay haharap din ang 5 kontraktor na sina Pacifico Curly Discaya, asawa ni Sara Discaya, Darcy Kirill Respicio ng Darcy and Anna Builders, Sally Santos ng SYMS Construction, Maritoni Meligrito ng Elite General Construction at Edgardo Sagog ng Edmaru Construction. Sa subpoena na yan, meron ding inissued sa 3 DPWH officials na sina Engineer JP Mendoza and even itong si Engineer Bryce Hernandez na former Bulacan 1st District Engineer, Assistant Engineer. Pati ang COA ay inisyuhan din ng subpoena doon sa fraud audit highlights na inaasahang isusumite ng ni Chairman Gamaliel Cordoba. Inaasahan din ang pagdalo ng ilang mga kongresista at nagbahagi rin itong si Baguio Mayor Benjamin Magalong na mas prefer niya, though invited siya dito sa Senado, mas prefer niya muna raw na isiwalat yung kanyang mga alegasyon tungkol sa ilang mga kongresistang sangkot dito sa issue ng flood control project sa Kamara. And tatalakayin din sa Senado, sinisiguro yan ni Senate Minority Leader Tito Soto, yung koneksyon naman ng ilang mga senador sa contractors ng flood control projects. Obviously kasi na hindi ito natanong sa ilang mga kontratista na present sa mga lumipas na pagdinig. Posible raw itong upuan ng Senate Committee on Electoral Reforms na pinangungunahan ni Senator Ping Lacson, lalo pat may ilang mga kontratista na lumulutang ngayon na mayroong koneksyon sa ilang mga senador. Posible rin daw na sumalang sa Q&A si Senator Mark Villar sa pagdating naman ng budget deliberations ng DPWH na nakaschedule na sa susunod na mga linggo. Hindi rin kasi siya natanong tungkol sa kanyang papel sa flood control projects bilang kalihim noong Duterte administration. At inaasahan din ang pagpapaliwanag naman ng Philippine Contractors Accreditation Board sa tila mga butas na nakita ng komite sa kanilang pag-issue ng mga lisensya. At nabanggit din sa atin naman kanina, Pauline, doon sa 15 contractors, meron daw isang nagbigay ng kanilang pagpapaliwanag na nais na lang ma-excuse due to personal reasons sa pagdinig ngayong araw. Pero so far, 9 a.m., magsisimula na ang pagdinig. Pauline.
Alright, maraming salamat para sa update na yan. That was mobile journalist Marimon Reyes reporting live from the Senate. And now we go back to the House, where the House Appropriations Committee is set to hold a hearing on the proposed 2026 budget for the Office of the President. And to tell us more, we have mobile journalist Arles de los Santos. Hi Arles, what can you tell us?
Magandang umaga po, Lino. Ngayon nga ay hinihintay na natin na magsimula ang deliberasyon ng Kamara para sa 2026 proposed national budget ng Office of the President, kung saan nagkakahalaga nga yan ng 27.28 billion pesos. At ayan nga ay inaasahan natin busisiin at ipagbaliban daw sana ang parliamentary courtesy ayon sa ilang mga grupo dahil 72% kasi yan na mas mataas kumpara sa 15.84 billion na budget ng opisina para sa taong 2025. 4.5 billion pesos din dyan ang nakalaan sa Confidential and Intelligence Fund na ayon nga sa ilang mga eksperto ay mahirap busisiin. Lalo pa ito pa ay kasama sa mga maiinit na usapin ngayon sa usapin ng budget para sa 2026. 1 billion pesos naman dyan ang inaasahan na makalaan para sa local and foreign trips ng Pangulo para daw ma-encourage ang ibang mga bansa na magtungo sa Pilipinas at magkaroon nga ng partnership sa ating bansa. Sa ngayon, Pauline, ay hinihintay natin ang pagdating ng ilan pang mga kawani ng Office of the President para sumailalim nga sa deliberasyon na ito at magsisimula yan ngayong alas 9 ng umaga. Pauline.
Arles, sino-sino ba yung mga key officials na inaasahan ngang a-attend ng hearing today?
Sa ngayon, Pauline, ay inaasahan natin ang isa nga sa mga Presidential Peace Advisor ng Office of the President na si Carlito Galvez Jr. at iba pang mga sangay na opisina ng Office of the President ngayong araw.
All right, thank you very much for that report. That was mobile journalist Arles de los Santos reporting live from the House of Representatives. Now in other news, Carlo Acutis, a British-born Italian who died of leukemia at age 15, became the first Catholic saint of the millennial generation in a Vatican ceremony led by Pope Leo XIV. Acutis used his computer skills to build websites to promoting his faith. Pope Leo XIV canonized Acutis alongside Pier Giorgio Frassati, a young Italian man known for helping those in need and died of polio in the 1920s. Speaking to thousands of young worshippers in St. Peter's Square, the Pope praised both as examples of holiness and service. And from Seoul to Manila, Team Korea is now geared up for a tougher battle on the world stage. This as their men's national volleyball team vows to bring their A game at the FIVB World Championships here in the Philippines. The details in this report by Mobile Journal Amy Atienza.
Team Korea finally arrived in time for the FIVB World Championships. The men of South Korea are ready now more than ever to showcase their top-notch volleyball performance to the world. Upon their arrival in the Philippines last Saturday, Korean setter Wontaek-woo said that they took their FIVB experience last year to bring out their A-game this time around.
한국 대표팀은 이 대회를 위해서 작년부터 엄청 준비를 해왔기 때문에 저희는 100% 준비를 해서 출전했다고 생각합니다.
Their game plan? To take it one step at a time, especially since they are up against teams including France, Argentina, and Finland in Pool C of the tournament.
일단 저희 조의 모든 팀들이랑 저희가 경쟁을 해서 이겨야 또 본선으로 올라갈 수 있는 거기 때문에 저희 조랑 같이 있는 팀들 모든 팀들이 경쟁자다.
With enough hard work and skills at hand, Taek-woo also looks forward to show their skills and their spirit as a team. He even noted that their camaraderie is as vital as their game.
일단 뭐 저희가 준비한 거 열심히 하고 또 이게 우승이라는 게 운도 많이 따라줘야 된다고 생각을 해서 저희 거를 최대한 열심히 하면서 운도 같이 많이 따라준다면.
And as they are welcomed by their fans in Manila, the Korean setter does not only keep his eye on the prize, as he also wants to explore the country in their visit. He even shared that he wants to try the Filipino tropical fruits like the pineapple. The Korean men's volleyball team will showcase their grit in the upcoming FIVB World Championships, which will happen on September 12 to 25 in Manila. Mobile journalist Amy Atienza, we are One News.
Still in sports, Filipina tennis star Alex Ayala is now a WTA champion after claiming her first singles title at the Guadalajara Open in Mexico. Here's the report.
A few weeks after her historic campaign at the U.S. Open, Filipino tennis star Alex Ayala returned to action at the Guadalajara Open in Mexico. She advanced through tough opponents and capped her run by claiming her first Women's Tennis Association or WTA singles title, rallying past Hungary's Pana Udvardy. Although Ayala entered the match as the higher-ranked player, Udvardy took the first set 6-1. Ayala regained her rhythm in the second set, winning 7-5 after a fierce exchange of shots, and carried the momentum into the third set to clinch the championship 6-3. After the match, she thanked supporters and posed for photos with Filipino fans in attendance. President Bongbong Marcos also congratulated Ayala and pledged continued support for Filipino athletes. Following the win, Ayala climbed to world number 61 in the WTA rankings. She is now headed to Brazil to compete in the Sao Paulo Open, where she will participate as the third seed.
And that wraps up today's episode of Morning Matters. We hope we've given you just the right start to your morning. Let's make the day matter. I'm Pauline Verzosa, sitting in for Gretchen Ho. We are One News, all sides, all the time.